If you are a CityCast superfan, you've definitely heard us singing the praises of our longtime supporter, Paulson & Nace. So there's big news. Paulson & Nace is now Nace Law Group. Same great team, just with a new name. When you are hurt by the negligence of others, you want a lawyer that will actually fight for you, not one that will settle for the bare minimum. Nace's compassionate lawyers fight to bring cases to juries, so you can get everything you deserve. If you have been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Nace Law Group for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.washingtondcinjurylawyers.com or call 202-463-1999. Today on CityCast DC, our city government needs to find a way to balance its budget and to plan for a future where tens of thousands of federal jobs might never come back. Mayor Muriel Bowser's proposal is to make a bunch of big, painful cuts, but also to spend more on things like stadium projects that she thinks will boost the economy. As you can imagine, not everyone agrees with this. Her budget director, Jenny Reed, sat down with us to walk us through their thinking. I promise it's not too wonky. Today is Monday, June 16th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Jenny.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, too.
All right. So the mayor has announced her 2026 budget, even while there is a big hole in the current one, thanks to Congress. And, it takes place amidst a backdrop of fairly daunting, unprecedented economic news. Most of the top line stuff involves like cuts. And I guess the big question, and I suppose this informs your work, is that how screwed are we right now?
Well, it's a great question. I think the short answer is we're not.
Seems pretty screwed to me.
Well, I think we have certainly some really challenging circumstances that we're facing, right? But our job is to not sort of sit back and let those things happen. Our job is to figure out strategies and tools that we can employ to make sure that we're not screwed. And so that's what the mayor has done in this budget proposal that she just released.
So can you give us, before we get to 2026, can you give us a sort of status update on where we're at now with the hole in the budget that was caused by this congressional budget?
Sure. So as listeners probably know, back in March, the Congress passed what's known as a continuing resolution. And when they passed that continuing resolution, they sort of inexplicably excluded language that DC had enjoyed for years, which would allow us to keep spending at our current approved funding levels. So for us, that was FY25. What's really mind-boggling about this is there had already been 2 prior continuing resolutions that had passed that included that language. So Congress had already told us back in the fall, yes, we approve your budget. Then they passed 2 continuing resolutions saying, go ahead, keep spending at your approved levels. And then this sudden change. What it meant was that by having to revert to the prior year funding levels, it would have blown a $1.1 billion hole in our budget halfway through the fiscal year. And that would have meant really bad consequences.
That $1 billion number was really scary. Lately, I've heard it as a much smaller number. What happened?
Right. So what we were trying very hard to work with both the Congress and the president to get a fix, right? So once this came out, we heard folks saying, oh, it's a mistake. We didn't mean to do it. We didn't mean to do it. The mayor worked with the Senate and Senator Susan Collins to introduce a fix. The president tweeted his support of it. The speaker, Mike Johnson, said he wanted to fix it. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened. And we kept waiting and no fix was coming. And so we became very concerned that they weren't actually going to fix it. And so what we started to do was look at how can we make changes in a budget that we can live with if they don't end up fixing it. And that's exactly what we did.
So what are some of the things, like we're still talking about 2025, what are some of the things that you cut or you changed? What are some of the ways that, me as a DC citizen are going to feel the effects?
Sure. So we did everything possible to minimize the impact. So the first thing that we did was we looked at what are the tools in our legislative toolbox that allow us to make changes without having to go back to Congress. And we found a couple that really worked in our favor. The first is what's known as the 6% solution. So in April, the mayor notified Congress saying we are going to use an existing law that says that we can increase our annual appropriations by 6%, regardless of what Congress passed, as long as we notify you and the CFO certifies that we have the revenues to back it up, which he did. So that immediately shrunk our gap down by about $650 million. So that was a huge, huge chunk off of that. Then we looked at all of our individual accounts, and we were basically able to winnow down the $1.1 billion gap to $347 million.
And so is that 347 million, what is going to disappear? I mean, I was going to ask you for a status update, but I think you probably couldn't even ask Mike Johnson for a status update. There doesn't seem to be any progress yet.
Well, we still don't have any definitive, clear answer on what's going to happen. So what we did in order to close that gap was we instituted a hiring freeze. That's saving us about $63 million. Importantly, we didn't freeze front-facing positions, so we can still hire for firefighters, teachers, recreation specialists for the summer, police officers. We did make some cuts in contracts and services, and then we shifted a bunch of costs that could wait until the next fiscal year. And those were largely funds that were going out to pay out collective bargaining agreements. So as a result of all of that, the bottom line is that there are no furloughs or layoffs. There are no facility closures. We have a fully funded public safety and public education system, and we have zero changes to our summer programming.
So while you're doing all that, you're also building the budget, which is, again, it's just a proposal. It's the mayor's proposal. The council's got to vote on it for 2026. And under our law, you've got to do it for 4 years. We're at a moment where the DC CFO, Glenn Lee, predicted the city is going to see $1 billion deficit over the next 4 years. This is due to there's going to be higher unemployment because the biggest industry in town, the federal government, is contracting and threatening to move and all that stuff. There's talk of lots of people wanting to move out of not just of the city, but of the region. Basically, in this scenario, we're going to be a less active city with less money around. And you've had to make a lot of cuts, which have been maligned by some people as trickle-down economics, the things you preserved, you're calling the growth agenda. But in the face of this really unprecedented thing, how are you preparing for it?
Sure. So I think going back to the original question you asked me, right? Are we screwed? And I gave the quick answer of no. But let me talk a little bit more about why.
Well, actually, technically, I said how screwed are we? So I assumed that you agreed with me that we were screwed, but you don't.
No. How screwed are we? So we're not. We got a plan. So I think it's important to remember that we had a really strong foundation going into basically this calendar year, right? So prior to January of 2025, we were the fastest growing state in the country. Our population topped over 700,000. We had the fastest improving urban school district. Violent crime has been the lowest in 3 decades. And we've had, 28 clean consecutive audits, 29 consecutive balanced budgets, 52 days of cash on hand. So we have a really, really strong foundation. Then January 2025 happened. And what we saw was, the significant changes to the federal government workforce, right? And the federal government is the number one employer in Washington, D.C., right? It's our biggest employer. And so the revenue forecast that the chief financial officer came out with in February gave us really the first look at the implications of that dramatic and swift federal workforce reduction. And what he said was we're going to anticipate losing about 40,000 jobs, as well as, associated spending and income that goes along with that. resulting in the $1 billion loss of revenues that we had to solve for. So that's how we started approaching our budget, is how do we address this job loss and how do we get jobs back so that we can make sure that DC residents are employed and we don't start to go down that sort of doom spiral of not investing in services and programs that people need, and then they start to leave the city, et cetera.
Again, that sounds like screwed to me. I mean, or at least it would be keeping me up at night. But what I think you're about to come to is you got a plan. Can you explain the plan to me?
That's right. Yeah, we're of course very, very worried about this change, and that's where the mayor really said to us, "Okay, we need a growth agenda. We need to find a way to make sure that we can bring back these jobs, that we can keep the city growing and thriving, despite all of these obstacles being thrown our way." And so the FY 2026 budget invests in that growth agenda, and it sort of has three key pillars to it. And as I talk about different investments in the budget, it's important to keep in mind there's sort of three questions that we asked ourselves as we were thinking about which investments to make. Does it keep people and families in the district and attract residents? Does it create economic activity to fund our city services? And does it attract new businesses and create new jobs for DC residents? So the growth agenda, as I mentioned, follows three key pillars. One, it cuts red tape and reduces barriers to growth. So for example, this is us doubling down on our business attraction and retention incentives. This includes repealing Initiative I-82, or what's known as the tip minimum wage. This involves putting vacant lots back into productive use, lowering the paid family leave tax, really things that we're trying to make sure that businesses have an easier time opening, operating, and staying in the District of Columbia. Then the second pillar is leaning in on what we do well. So we know that we have to diversify our economy. We've been doing that for some time, but we really have to put our foot on the gas with this significant shrinkage in the federal government. And so we want to lean into what we do well here in DC, which is sports, entertainment, and tech. So I'm sure that you all have talked before about the historic investment into the RFK campus. We're excited to bring the Washington Commanders home. We also have investments in our Capital One Arena to support our Wizards, our Capitals, and our Mystics. We have enhanced funding for our theaters around the city. And then we're investing more in technology and technology startups.
But wait, so to go to the stadium for a sec, and this efforts to attract more hospitality industry and stuff, we're losing tens of thousands of federal jobs, which pay pretty well, middle-class jobs. And it sounds to me like you're spending a bunch of money to replace those jobs with jobs of like peanut vendors at the stadium and busboys, which don't pay nearly as well. How is this investment work? I mean, I get it. It's cool to have a football stadium, but unless you're like a very well-paid football player or owner, I don't see, like, where's the win? How does this pencil out to grow the economy?
Sure. So this investment is really helping us to make sure that we can create more city revenue to support programs and services. So there will be a lot of jobs created as part of this investment. Yes, there will be jobs that maybe don't pay as high a salary as a longer-term career federal employee. But that's not the only people we're making sure have jobs in this economy. We want to make sure everyone has a chance. And so this will create construction jobs. There are a lot of construction jobs that do pay very good wages here in the district. We also have people who are now, given the fact that we have multiple sports venues around the city, are able to actually work full time at a number of different venues. And the more you diversify your venues, the more opportunities people have.
But who are you talking? I mean, not athletes. Who are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about people that work in the stadiums. So the more you diversify, right? Because each team has a different season, right? And you can sort of build out a career by being able to work in multiple venues there. The other thing that the stadium is going to do is it's going to unlock economic development at a much faster rate at the 188 acres at RFK campus. And so we're very excited. We're not just talking about bringing back a stadium and the Washington Commanders. We are talking about bringing thousands and thousands of new units of housing, a third of which will be affordable. We're talking about bringing a new indoor sportsplex for youth, new green space along the Anacostia. So all of those things will generate more tax revenue to support the programs and services that people want us to deliver.
And you believe that you wouldn't be able to do that without having a stadium?
I think that if we did not have a stadium at that location, the development would take decades. And we know that from other developments across the city that do not have a clear anchor.
Get ready for DC's most intoxicating theater experience yet. Gala Theater presents the world premiere adaptation of Botiquín de Boleros, an immersive cabaret-style musical that takes audiences on a nostalgic journey through love, breakup, and self-love. You're not just watching, you'll be stepping into the Columbia Heights Bolero Bar, where patrons share stories of broken hearts through boleros spanning from Mexico to the Caribbean to South America. The show runs June 11th to 29th. Tickets are going fast. Find more info and get yours at galatheater.org. That's GALATHEATRE.org.
This episode is sponsored by Babbel. Have you ever picked a vacation spot based on where you won't need a phrase book? With Babbel, the language barrier no longer has to hold you back. You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based techniques, which quickly teach you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. Babbel has more than a dozen languages available for you to learn at your own pace, with material tailored to your individual proficiency level, interests, and time availability. I'm David Plotz, CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel. What I really love about learning Spanish with Babbel is that it works with me where I am. The app and the website keep track of what I've learned. They help me review what I probably forgot from last time, and always is keeping me engaged with a new challenge based on actual conversations I might have in Spain or Mexico or Colombia, especially food conversations because I love food conversations. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to give you 55% off subscriptions, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/CityCast, spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
So the knock on this budget from more progressive elements is this is trickle-down economics. You are making life easier on a bunch of industries that already wanted this anyway. We're using the emergency of what Trump is doing to the federal government as an excuse to do stuff that they wanted anyway. Like, how do you push back against that?
Well, so I don't think in any way that this budget is trickle-down economics, right? And I think people use trickle-down economics as like a blanket term to mean a variety of different things.
Well, I guess when I hear it, I think doing stuff to make rich people in existing industries richer with the idea that they will then spend money and that money will eventually reach disadvantaged people.
Yeah, that is not our goal, is to make rich people richer. What we are trying to do is make sure that we can have jobs that will support our DC residents, right? And the way that you do that is by making it easier to open, to sustain, and to maintain a business here in the district, right? We're not talking about making those businesses richer. We're talking about making it easier for them to come here, to stay here, and to grow here. And then the other thing I would say is that if you look at DC's budget in its entirety, right, everyone is sort of focusing on this growth agenda. We spend the majority of our funds on education and health and human services. That has been true for a very long time, and it continues to be true today. While there are reductions to programs and services in the budget, there are not wholesale eliminations of programs that we know that people need. We needed to make tweaks to control costs. As we said, we've lost $1 billion of revenue. We had programs and services that were growing hundreds of millions of dollars more every year. We can't afford that.
There's also pretty massive Medicaid cuts, not just in DC, but coming to all the states. What is the? Can you give me a percentage there? What's going down?
So on Medicaid, we were looking at cost growth of about $182 million in Medicaid alone. We're not the only place, facing this. Medical costs just grow significantly year over year. And we have one of the most expansive Medicaid programs in the country. So what we did is we looked at what are ways that we can control costs. And so we started to kick the tires around some different options with the goal of minimizing disruption in healthcare services for our residents. This was the hardest area of the budget that we had to work on for sure. And so we looked at this option as a way of trying to make, the best out of a really difficult situation where we could not afford to increase by hundreds of millions of dollars this continued coverage, but we were able to shift people to a very, very similar program that we hope will not disrupt any of their current healthcare services.
Do you have a sense of how many people will lose their eligibility?
So about 25,000 people will shift to the basic health plan. So I just want to be clear. It's not that they will be left without a health insurance option or even one that is affordable and offers very similar benefits. They will, and we are going to do everything we can to make the enrollment, the transition seamless.
So one of the tricky things about being DC without being a state is that under the law, the district has to balance its budget, certify that it has 4 years of balanced budgets in the future. In your proposal, you're not cutting schools. It sure looks like schools are facing cuts in 2 years from now or 3 years from now, unless something changes. Can you explain what is going on specifically with that one?
Sure. So I think, for folks who tuned in last year, you probably heard me talk about the fact that we have to have a 4-year balanced budget, and that is unique pretty much for any jurisdiction. And so we have to make decisions today based on where we think revenues are going to land in 4 years. 4 years is a really long time. A lot's going to happen in between now and then. And so what we need...
God.
A lot of great things. Don't worry, a lot of great things. And so what we needed to do was really be able to put very real numbers to what it would look like in the out years. And when I say out years, I refer to FY 27, 28, and 29, which is the years after FY 26, which is the one coming up. We had to put in real cuts because we don't have the revenues coming in to support our services. Now, there's two things about that. One is, as I mentioned before, the two areas that we spend the most amount of money in are education and health and human services. You're not going to be able to cut a budget like the districts without touching those two areas unless you want to completely decimate every other part of government. Like the other parts just don't even come close to making up what we spend in those two areas.
So based on what we know now, by what percentage will they get cut in a year?
So based on what we know now, for DCPS, the shift, we're really making a shift of fixed costs out of DCPS into our Department of General Services. So there won't really be any kind of change. The second point that's really important to make.
But how does it save us money in the long run if there's no change?
DCPS schools won't feel a change, right? What'll happen is the UPSFF, the Universal Per Student Funding Formula.
Oh, I knew that.
Good. You've been doing this for a while. Would start to decrease because the funds for those fixed costs would no longer be paid for within the universal per student funding formula. They'd be paid for in the Department of General Services.
But again, what you're saying is there's going to be less money based on what we know now in 2027, 2028, whatever. How is the less money, if the fact that there's less money, going to affect how much money the government spends?
Well, this comes to my second point, which is that when we get to FY 2027, we're going to start the formulation process all over again. So those cuts that are in the out years, it's not like they're locked in for the next 4 years and nothing can change, right? We will revisit when we develop the 2027 budget, both FY 2027 and the entire financial plan based on the resources that we have available. And that's also why it's really important for us to think about investing in the growth agenda, because we don't accept that those are the resources that we are going to have. What we want to do is make sure that we can grow the economy so that we can begin to reinvest in the kinds of programs and services that people want us to.
So 15%, you said, of the growth in the city budget came from taxes going up. Now we've had the benefit as a city, as a region, of coming through a period where there was a lot of federal contracting going on, where the government was not being cut to the bone. I think these things have a lot of impact on the cities having had economic growth. The city also sort of turned around its reputation in a very good way that it attracted people. All those things are not in play anymore. And I take your point that you are putting the investment on trying to do new things to get new employers and new action in the city that will throw off tax dollars and make it possible to have the things we want. But we haven't talked much about the possibility of needing to find that money through actually raising taxes or finding new revenue streams. What's the likelihood of that? What's the prospects? How would that work?
Mm-hmm. So the budget that the mayor put forward includes no new tax increases, and that was very intentional for a number of reasons. I think, if you think about sort of the big taxes that are out there that you could raise, income, property, sales, you would have to increase the rates by a really, really substantial amount in order to find $300 to $400 million of revenue every year, which is what we are proposing to lose. In fact, we actually delayed a sales tax increase. It would have gone up to 6.5%. We delayed it by a year because this is not the time that we want to be increasing taxes on our residents. And that 0.5% cost about $67 million. So just to give you a sense of just the magnitude that you would have to increase would be very substantial in a way that it would absolutely have an impact on people. And as you mentioned, people are losing their jobs, right? This is not the time that we now want to also say to them, well, and by the way, we need you to pay more in taxes.
Hey, Jenny, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not subscribe to our morning newsletter? It's called Hey DC, and it will not add a penny to your personal budget deficit. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.